Hello, welcome. Thanks everybody for being here. We're so excited to have you. We're just gonna wait a couple minutes to let people in from the waiting room before we get started. Thank you so much for being here. Please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat and let folks know where you're coming from. If you have anything you want to share about your favorite springtime food that's coming online right now. We're so excited that the markets are getting going and crops are blooming. It's really exciting. So please feel free to put that in the chat if you'd like. Don't forget to mute your mics throughout the event, and we are recording this webinar and we're also streaming it live on YouTube for the first time, which is pretty exciting. And just so keep that in mind. We will have the recording available to folks later if you want it. Yeah, just let us know where you're coming from, your name, your pronouns. My name is Ava. I'm the director of Hope's Harvest. We also have Merle, who is our amazing AmeriCorps helper who's been running all of these events this spring that we've been doing. We're so grateful to have them supporting on tech and checking the chat for questions. If you're having any issues, please do put that in the chat. We'll be monitoring it. If you have any questions, put those in the chat and we'll return back to them as we have time at the end of the cooking demonstration. And we're just gonna wait like one more minute and then we'll get started. All right. So thanks everyone for coming. We are so excited to have this amazing cooking demonstration with Lorén Spears from the Tomaquag Museum. I'm Ava, I'm from Hope's Harvest, and we are asking folks to introduce themselves in the chat, where you're coming from, your favorite spring vegetable, your pronouns, and we're really grateful to have all these amazing folks joining us live. And yeah, we're gonna get started. So first, I want to acknowledge that Hope's Harvest, as an organization, we glean from all over the state of Rhode Island and southeastern Massachusetts, and those are traditional, ancestral, and contemporary lands of the Narragansett, Nipmuc, Niantic, Wampanoag, and Manasean indigenous peoples. This land was stolen, and it was cared for and called home by many more indigenous tribes from time immemorial, now since gone. Native peoples then and now cultivated the land in animals in symbiosis, living in partnership with the natural world in a fundamentally sustainable way that we have a lot to learn from as we suffer from the effects of an industrialized global food system. Now more than ever, indigenous communities are suffering from the effects of food insecurity, a byproduct of a colonialist state which has limited access to traditional resources and knowledge that were cultivated for thousands of years. Increased access to quality food, self-determination, and food sovereignty for these communities has never been more important. And Hope's Harvest is committed to showing up in partnership with indigenous leaders who are taking a stand today, as they always have, for the earth and their traditional relationship with the land and the abundance it provides. So just to explain a little bit about what Hope's Harvest does, we are an organization that mobilizes volunteers to recover surplus food from farms. We distribute that to hunger relief agencies. For those of you who don't know about Hope's Harvest or joining because of Tomaquag Museum, we're really grateful that you're here. We do this work because we believe that nourishing our community with fresh, healthy food is an act of love and justice with the power to transform our world. So we know that that work in and of itself is not actually sufficient to transform our world. So we recognize that all people need to take a stand for justice, equity, and an end to the oppressive systems that prevent us from living in harmony with each other. One of our values as an organization states that because we honor the inherent worth and dignity of every human being, we stand against systemic inequality, stand up for food justice, food sovereignty, and the rights of all people to self-determination. So partnering with the Tomaquag Museum is one of the ways we make that commitment real. We're so, again, grateful. We want to thank you for being here, for sharing this space with us, and for committing to this work alongside us. So here's our agenda for today. Again, everyone's doing introductions in the chat. Then we're going to have our cooking demonstration with Lorén for about an hour. And then we'll have some time for Q&A at the end, which I'm really excited about. You can put your questions in the chat throughout. We'll be reading those questions out loud, and Lorén will be able to take those for probably the last like 15 or so minutes, and we'll do a little wrap up at the very end. So welcome, Lorén Spears. We're so excited to have you doing this amazing demonstration. Lorén is the executive director of the Tomaquag Museum and aspires to empower Native youth and to educate the public on Native history, culture, environment, and the arts. Lorén shares her cultural knowledge and traditional arts learned through her family with the public through museum programs such as tours, virtual programming, and educational resources. Under Lorén's leadership, the Tomaquag Museum received the Institute of Museum and Library Services National Medal. An educator for 25 years, she has served as an adjunct faculty at Brown University and the University of Rhode Island. Lorén founded the Nuituan School affiliated with the Tomaquag Museum and was a teacher in Newport Public Schools for 12 years. Outside of her work in the museum, she's also an educator, activist, author, and Indigenous artist. Her work as an author includes Dawnland Voices, an anthology of Indigenous writing of New England, Through Our Eyes, an Indigenous view of Mashapog Pond, The Pursuit of Happiness, an Indigenous view from slaves to soldiers, the First Rhode Island Regiment in the American Revolution, and she co-edited The Key into the Language of America by Roger Williams. Lorén received her undergraduate degree from the University of Rhode Island, her master's degree from the University of New England with a focus on elementary education. Lorén has been the recipient of numerous awards and honors, most notably 2016 Tom Roberts Prize for Creative Achievement in the Humanities, a Doctor of Humane Letters, honoris causa from the University of Rhode Island in 2017. I just am so deeply impressed and grateful for all of that. And like the fact that we're going to learn from Lorén, who is such a skilled educator, is such a blessing for all of us. So thank you so much. And Lorén, let's have you take it away.
Ascui Kwasin, Natasuis Makasini Pashao at Narragansett, Natasuis Lorén Spears at Englisha, Ni Narragansett Nahantek, Kanupiam at Aki at Narragansett. So hello everyone, good evening. I'm Lorén Spears. My traditional name is Makasini Pashao, and I am Narragansett Niantic, and welcome to the homelands of the Narragansett people. I'm really excited to be with you all here tonight, and saying hello to all my friends out there, new and old. And I'm really excited to share with you a bit about our culture. And I first want to say, I want to give thanks for my ancestors, my elders, my family, and community that persevered during, the last 400 years of conquest, colonization, detribalization, urbanization, all the different things that have been affecting us and our lifeways. But I thank them because they continue to pass it forward generationally. And as our ancestors and families have always told us, what we do today should impact the next 7 generations that come. So everything I do is for my children, my grandchildren, and those great-grandchildren and the next 7 generations that come beyond them. And hopefully they will also push that forward generation after generation. And part of that traditional ecological knowledge is the knowledge of the importance and the respect and the intersection of us with the land. As my elders often said to me, we are the land. What we do to the land, we do to ourselves. So with that in mind, we need to be thinking about caring for the land, but we also have to think about our relationship to the land and to those resources of the land in a holistic way. And throughout my chat tonight, I will talk to you about that. We're going to be learning about succotash that comes from the corn. And the beans, which I have the dried version, and then the already cooked version, pre-cooked anyway. So Weechamin or Weechaminiash, which is the corn, is really important in our community. And we have lots of ceremonies and lots of connections to the corn. So whether that's the corn planting moon, the green corn harvest, which is today, the Narragansett August meeting powwow. Last year was 345 years recorded. It's the oldest recorded Native gathering in the nation. And many old gatherings stem from traditional Thanksgivings and ceremonies. But corn is really integral to our lives because it was a means in which to create sustainability in our community. And if I start with the story, how the corn and the beans came to us, that will probably give you the best way to understand. So many, many moons ago, when the people, the Narragansett, were living on this land, they were busy hunting, fishing, gathering the gifts of the land. And as each season went, spring, summer, fall, they would gather the gifts. So whether that was spring fishing for the herring and the salmon and gathering, fiddleheads and the early spring berries, the strawberry, the field greens, and in the summer, shell fishing and deep water fishing and harvesting the plants of the season, all the different berries and all the different greens and all the different plants that we could eat to sustain ourselves. And the people, they dried things. They dried the fish in preparation for the winter season. And as the fall came, they gathered mushrooms and acorns and pounded them into flour. And they gathered the cranberry and hunted the wild game, whether that's venison or deer or moose or bear or rabbit. All of these things were harvested in a good way with ceremony and thanksgiving in their hearts. But this one winter, Popone, the winter, Sochipo fell vastly, and the winter became very, very white, and the snow became very, very deep, and it made it very difficult for the people to hunt. Even though they could hunt in the winter, the snow was so high and the winds were so strong, it was very difficult to track the animals. And so there became a famine. And the people's foods, even though they had dried them and stored them and prepared them, was not sustaining them through this difficult winter. I remember even in this modern day, about maybe 4 or 5 years ago, we had a deep winter where it was April and we had snow almost up to our knees. Well, this was one of those winters where the snow was deep and it stayed late into the spring, and the spring weather should have come and it didn't come. And it was just brutal. And the people prayed Katantuit. They prayed to him in song. They prayed with their families, and they rationed the food so that all could survive. But it was getting more and more difficult. Katantuit, the creator, noticed the people and how hard they worked throughout each season of the year, in the Sequan, the summer, the fall, Tequanic, and even in the winter, they were working and planning and trying to sustain themselves through this winter. But Creator saw that it was such a difficult winter, and Creator came down and spoke to the people that were praying to them and said, you must send your most brave, your most strong, Menekisu, strong warrior, and he must travel on a long journey. But if he does this, I will send a gift to you. So the people did ceremony and they prayed to Katantuit, and they prepared Kinep Musitash, and they said he would go. He's the strongest warrior and he has quick feet and he could get long distances in a quick way. And so his wife prepared him moccasinash, or shoes, extra shoes and boots, and prepared in the pouch a bit of pemmican, which is dried meat, dried venison, pounded with some sunflower seeds and some cranberries to sustain him on his journey. And they all sang him songs to help him on his way and to help the people. And off off he went on this journey. And on this journey, he went and he sang songs of thanksgiving and prayer. And he sang to help him travel. You know how weekend, you know how weekend, you know weekend, way hey oh no weekend nooks. And he walked and he ran and he walked and he ran in the direction that they were given toward the southwest. And many moons went by, but after a bit, the landscape started to open up and more time went by and the landscape changed again. And Succotash climbed on what we now call a mesa today and prayed to Katantuit. And Katantuit said, you have done what was meant for you to do. You are sacrificing your life for the life of all of your people. And for that, I'm going to give you a gift. And that gift is going to be corn and beans. And Succotash said, I don't know as though I can bring back those kernels of corn and bean to the people. And the creator said, you have done your job. You have sacrificed for the people. I'm going to send this to them via the crow, Kakon. And crow landed on the mesa. And the creator gave him a kernel of corn and a kernel and a bean seed. And he flew off. And he flew and flew and flew until he landed in the land of the Narragansett people. And the people saw him land in the ceremonial circle and they circled around wondering what is happening. And the crow did a little dance. And out of the ear popped a corn kernel and did a little dance. And out of the other side, a bean seed. And then we had the corn and the bean, and the people were told of the sacrifice of their warrior and how from then on they would have this food that would sustain them, during the long winter months, because they would have this kind of corn, flint corn, that could be stored in the ground in their caches along with the dry bean seeds. And that would give them lots of nutrients in the long winter months and would give them sustainability to flourish in this land. And that is how the Narragansett people have lived in this place for more than 10,000 years with the gifts of the land. Ninaj, let it be so. So in thinking about the corn and the beans and the importance of it, I'm going to first talk back to the flint corn. This flint corn is a hard kerneled corn. If you've ever had a Johnny cake or cornmeal or a tortilla or why can't I think of the thing that wraps in the corn? What is that called? I can't think of the word. But nonetheless, various kinds of corn meal-based foods. I was talking to my daughter just then. Tamales, thank you. And she's helping me film tonight. And so we have also sweet corn, which is a soft-eared corn and doesn't grow hard. And so you don't need to grind it with a mortar and a pestle like you do the flint corn. And then the beans are, a great gift, and they are a wonderful food source that gives you lots of nutrition. So back to the corn for a moment. I want to speak to the fact that the corn is very integral in our lives. As I mentioned, we have Thanksgivings and ceremonies that are related to the corn, whether that's for the planting of the corn or the harvesting of the corn. But because of this gift of sustainability, literally this gift of life for our people, we have ceremonies at birth for our children, and it's considered a symbol of fertility. Corn is, because it was the fertility of all of our people that would help us to sustain us generation after generation after generation. The corn is also a gift in many different kinds of ways. We can certainly eat the food. We have a ceremonial connection to the corn, and it can be very useful as well. So that is whether our ancestors may have made mats. This is a mini mat, a model, but giant corn husk mats for their homes. They would make baskets. This is a little coiled basket. It's a mixture of corn husk and what we call sweetgrass. Sweetgrass is not edible, but it is medicinal and useful. And the corn husk can be used to make these really lovely corn husk dolls. And one was made by one of my sons, Ridge, and this one was made by Laurel, who's helping me film today, quite some time ago when they were little. And so there's lots of uses for the corn. You can make mats, and if you get a chance to come visit Tomaquag Museum, you can see a gorgeous corn husk mat that's all braided together. And so there's lots of gifts here. So a couple more things before we get started cooking. This happens to be a basket that is known as a corn washing basket. And the students of Nuitawan School made it with a Haudenosaunee artist quite a few years ago, maybe 2008 or so. And it resides in one of our exhibits there. And it shows the continuation from our historic baskets to our contemporary baskets, meaning made today, but connected to our people. And so the corn is an integral part of our lives and very important in our life ways. So I want to recognize my grandmother, Eleanor Dove, also known as Pretty Flower. From her, I learned about Succotash. She owned and operated with my grandfather, Dovecrest Indian Restaurant. And back in those days, they called it Indian Restaurant as opposed to indigenous, which is a word I prefer today, or many people prefer today, to Native American or American Indian or Indian. You also hear just Native as well. But that restaurant was a form of food sovereignty before food sovereignty was a term. It was a place where people could come and learn about Narragansett history and culture through the food, through the art, through their partnership with Tomaquag Museum. And so I give thanks for my grandmother, Nakumis, grandmother in Narragansett, for giving me the gift of the joy of cooking traditional foods. And this is one of those dishes that she made all the time at Dovecrest. It was a staple. And many people would come to have succotash, which is this delicious corn and bean dish. So I'm going to start with making it. And so succotash is literally a very simple dish, in my opinion. It is onions. So you can have any kind of onion you like. You can have a sweet Vidalia onion if you want a mild flavor. You can have a little more potent onion if you want. You could even put green onions in it, which I know is my daughter's favorite, to have the more lighter flavored onions. But I tend to use just a classic yellow onion or a Vidalia onion. And I like to make mine cut really skinny because I kind of like the onion to mostly disappear into the succotash as you're making it. And so I tend to cut it one way and then cut it the other. I mean, cutting onions is not very difficult or very hard, but I like to make it that way. And, you know, historically we had wild onions and wild garlic, so you could flavor your foods with those things. And that was really wonderful. So I have a pot over here. It's a little out of screen, so I'm going to just put my onions in there for now. And we're going to focus on the really pretty things in the front. Then after you have your onions in the pan, you saute them with a little bit of oil. Today, you can use whatever oil you like. You can use olive oil, you can use corn oil, you can use vegetable oil, you can pretty much pick any kind of oil. Historically, we would have used a little bit of bear fat more than likely, or some other kind of animal fat to give us a little bit of oil for your cooking. And you have to understand, we were going to be cooking this food in a pot, right? Not a pot or a pan like of today, but like a cooking pot. So I'm going to show you this pot. Now this is quite small compared to what a cooking pot would be. However, I made this piece of pottery maybe 10 years or so ago, but I was inspired by the shape of historic cooking pots. And the reason why is, if you notice, the bottom is not flat. You know, today we make a piece of pottery, it's for decoration, it's on a shelf, it's flat, but a cooking pot is not flat. And so it curves up and in, it has this beautiful rim with its etched designs. But if you see my fingertips, the fingertips would be like stones in a fire pit, and they would hold the clay pot out of the fire a bit. But then the bottom portion of the pot would be very thick with clay. And that way, when the heat permeated up the pot, it would start to heat it without burning the food. And so the food would be more in this portion of the pot and keep your food cooking nicely so that it wouldn't burn. And, you know, obviously you can make soups and stews and succotash and a myriad of other things. So the next thing that you need after you saute your onions is you need some corn. Now, I have full ears of corn here for you to husk. And of course you could take the time to do that, but I've cheated a bit and made it a little easy so I have it a little bit quicker for me to do the husking. So you pull down your husks. Most people in Rhode Island have husked corn because corn is a staple here in the summertime for our communities. And that's a lot of fun. You do want to take off all the, why is my brain not coming up with the word for this? The silk, all the silk off of your corn. And it's really important to know that, you know, you should be using this, drying your corn husks and making some corn husk dolls, or drying it and making a corn husk basket, and not just throwing it away. If you don't have the art inspiration to make a doll or something like that, be sure to give it to one of your local neighbors that have goats and other animals that love to eat corn husk. And if you're making dolls, make sure you save the silk, because you can actually, traditionally we use the silk as hair. Today we might cheat and use some yarn and other things, but you might want to do that. So the corn itself, I actually like to make my corn with the corn raw, if you will, uncooked, and cut it from my corn cob now rather than after. But if you made corn on the cob and it's already cooked, you can cut it off and make it into succotash then. But if I'm making a fresh batch of succotash, I do that. So I like to use a bowl, because when you do this, the corn kernels kind of pop off and land all over the place. So you take your wide knife and you just literally go down the side of the corn and see how that is. And then you do it again. And you do want to kind of hit the corners where you left off, because you want to get as much of the pulp as you can into your corn mixture, because corn, succotash has a bit of a creaminess to it. And so you just keep doing that, going around your corn until you have all the kernels off your corn. So leave your card. So like when there's a little bit of a triangle there, I kind of go over it again just to get that little bit of pulp, because the pulp is what really makes it taste good. So we're going to do that a second time. We're going to go ahead and take our husks off. Now, I will tell you, in my recipe today, in my crock pot over here, I have about 12 ears of corn. I'll show it to you in a minute. I have about 12 ears of corn, and I have maybe 2 cups worth of beans. I like, for the beans, I like shelled beans, or what they call red beans, not red, pink beans. So shelled beans or pink beans, they're kind of this like slightly brown with a hint of red color. That's my preferred. When if you were going to get canned beans, we always get Stewart's shelled beans. Really important. If you're not processing your beans straight from scratch yourself, and even if you are, I suppose, make sure you rinse them and rinse away the starch. because sometimes people forget that and it does not give your succotash a nice texture. So if you look at this, you can kind of see how the texture of the fresh corn looks so far. So I'm going to put that in my pan. And I'm going to do it one more time, cutting the corn off of my cob. And see, you can see the moisture there. And it gives you a really nice texture. So so you're saying to yourself, hey, I want to have succotash, but I don't feel like getting all this corn on the cob and husking it and doing whatever. You can cheat. The cheat corn succotash still has onions in it, and you still saute them in the pan. It still has kernel corn in it, so you can use canned or frozen kerneled corn. I tend to like the frozen because it has a little bit more of this natural fresh taste of the fresh corn. And then you can add, so if I'm making a crock pot full, bigger than the crock pot I have here, I usually use, like if you're going to have company, I use 4 cans of kernel corn or 2 bags of kernel corn, 4 cans of creamed corn. Creamed corn from the store has just a little bit of water added and a little bit of cornstarch. When you're making fresh, you don't need it because there's a milkiness to this from the scraping of your cob. And so you're going to put that into your pot, and along with your onions and your corn, you're going to add your beans, and you're going to simmer that for a while, mixing it so that it's all together. Now, I will use any kind of pepper. This is some very coarse black pepper that we have at home, and it's very strong. And at home, I do that all the time. But my grandmother and my mother and others use white pepper. And the white pepper, the thing about it is you just don't see the pepper. It's more aesthetic than anything of having no black chunks in your food. The other thing that you can cheat, if you want to cheat a little bit, is you can put dried onions in it and use like chopped dried onions. You also can use frozen onions, but they're not as good as fresh or dried. I would definitely do it in order of fresh and then dry. And so you simmer this for a while, maybe 15, 20 minutes, have a little taste test. It's really up to you whether you want to have a little snap to the bite of your corn or you really want it really cooked down. I tend to like to have a little bit of snap, but it's more like 3/4 there than really on the raw side. So you would cook this for a while and you let it simmer. What I love about succotash is it goes really well in a crock pot. So I'm going to slide this over so it's a little bit more in view. Can you see that? So this is the succotash that has been cooking for a bit, and it has all the fresh corn and the pulp of the corn and the beans, and it smells so delicious and it's steaming, and we're going to have a sample of that in a bit. And so succotash is really, really easy. Now, you technically can use other dried beans, but in my family, the pink bean or the shelled bean is the bean that we use. If you want to be adventurous, you can take your succotash, that base, the corn and bean base that you have here, and you can add squash to it. And guess what it becomes? When you add corn, bean, and squash, you get the 3 sisters. And the 3 sisters are really important. So when we grow our gardens together, they have what is known as a symbiotic relationship, meaning they work together, they're collaborative. The corn is the big sister, and it grows up straight and tall and is sturdy and the sustainer and the foundation of the family. The bean is the next sister, and the bean grows up the corn stalk and provides nutrients to the soil, the nitrogen for the soil. And the squash, whether it's the summer squash or the winter squash, is really the baby sister, but its job is to keep the moisture in the ground and to keep the weeds away. And so you can have three sisters, corn, bean, and squash. We make so many versions of three sisters. A winter three sisters is, very hearty in the crock pot with the corn and the beans, and the winter squash with great chunks of butternut. It's so delicious. Or we do a very light summer fresh three sisters with the corn and the bean and the summer squashes. You can make it as salads and have it as a cold salad with the corn cold and the squashes cold. And you can switch from hard-shelled beans to green beans, which is really, really delicious. When my eldest son, Robin, got married, I think we had something like 5 versions of three sisters there. And what's fun is you can, based on the season, add things to your succotash or to your three sisters version that extends it. You can, in the summertime, you could add clams to it and have clams. You could add scallops to it in the fall. You could add oysters if you're adventurous. You can add ground venison, which is a favorite in our family. You can have turkey in it. You can have hamburger in it if you don't eat game foods. So all of these things are really important to the recipe. So you can add all kinds of things. And in our family, we've had bear, and we've had moose, and we've had elk, we've had raccoon. Those things are so delicious. And you can have turtle. Snapping turtle is like a red meat, like a beef, but not exactly. And my daughter is making lovely faces of mwah, because she loves turtle and turtle stew. And so we would use all of these different things in all the seasons to have your succotash or your corn and bean dish. And it's very sustainable for our people. So,
Lorén, can I just ask a couple questions that have come up?
Sure.
Quick. Okay, so question number 1 is, do you bring it to a boil or do you just simmer?
I prefer to simmer, so I don't boil it, I simmer it. I try to get it till it's just before a boil, like you can get that little bit of a frothiness on top, but not a full boil, so a simmer. I prefer, in the winter months, I cook it really for a long time. I throw it in the crock pot in the morning and let it cook on low all day long. And when we come home, we have a hearty meal. We often put venison in it. You can do it chunks like a stew, or you can do it ground.
Do you cook the meat first, or?
Oh, good question. We definitely cook the meat first. I usually saute the meat quickly first. If it is a stew meat, I just brown it, like a hot pan with a little bit of oil. Sometimes right when I saute the onions, I just get them browned, then throw them in. If it's hamburger, I do a quick saute so it's done and then throw that in. But do with a hamburger type meat, whether it's beef or venison, make sure you drain it so you don't end up with that fat in your three sisters or in your succotash, because that can make it have a funny texture. So I try to drain off the fat. It's healthier for you anyway.
If you're using a winter squash, does it make sense to cook that ahead of time too? Or do you just cut it smaller, or what's the best way to do that?
No, when it's winter squash, I pre-cook it. It depends on whether you're crock potting or cooking it in a pan. If it's in a pan and you're just kind of cooking it for dinner quickly, I pre-cook it. Excuse me. If the butternut squash, if you're putting it in the crock pot and you're going to leave it there for the whole day, I would just cut it small and let it break down in there. So like little tiny cube size butternut squash chunks, kind of like, if you were, think of it as the same density of like carrots. If you were cooking them in the crock pot, it will cook down. If it's summer squash in there, if it's all fresh stuff, you can kind of throw it in there at the same time. So feel free to continue to ask me questions. I was just going to show you a couple of other things. So this is a beautiful bowl in which, if you're harvesting your fruits and vegetables from your gardens that you could be gathering up your materials. This is actually a gourd bowl made from a wonderful Mohegan artist. And so we would use materials like that. The basket here can be another basket that you could be gathering your resources from your garden in. Just to give a couple of examples of materials that we have for our community. This one happens to be a basket that I made quite a long time ago. And so we're really excited about using all the resources of the land and the gifts the Creator has blessed us with. I had here on the table also some tools, scrapers. This is a tool that you could have used to scrape the corn instead of a modern day knife. You could have also used a tool like this for getting in the nooks and crannies of things. And historically, we did have wooden spoons. You could make them out of a burl, could make spoons out of like tulip poplar, and a variety of other resources. I don't have one of those handy today, but you could make knives and scrapers out of stone, bone, antler, to name just a few. You could even use shell as another form of scraper. If you were really trying to get the pulp off of here, you could really scrape with a shell or a stone. And so I wanted to make sure I remembered to say all the things I wanted to say.
One more quick question. Sorry to interrupt you. Is there liquid in have you added any additional liquid, or is the liquid from the corn sufficient to keep everything like wet?
If you see the bottom here, you can kind of see there's a moisture. I dumped some of it into the pan, but can you see the kind of milky moisture that's there?
Definitely.
The pulp actually makes quite a bit of liquid, but if you're cooking it and you think it needs a little more, I would just put a little dab of water in it. Just a small amount. I think sometimes if it's maybe maybe 2 or 3 tablespoons at the most, because you don't want it to be soupy. You still want it to be creamy, but not soupy. And so the moisture stays in the succotash really nicely. If you use cream corn from the store, it'll be a little bit creamier than this. If you really wanted to, you could make a cornstarch mixture with a little bit of water and a little bit of salt and pepper, but I don't. When the corn is fresh from the cob, why ruin it? It has such a vibrant, strong, sweet taste that I just like it to be natural. Obviously, in the modern era, if you wanted to put a dab of butter in it, I don't. I try to cook my food very traditionally, so I don't really use any butter in my succotash. And I've had all kinds of alternatives to succotash. We were over on Aquina, at the Aquina tribe of Gay Head on Martha's Vineyard. I was taking my sons when they were young to a youth event there, and they made succotash. It was equally delicious from the corn, cut off like this, but the elder that was making it, she had pan sauteed bacon. Now, of course, bacon is not traditional, but boy, bacon always makes everything taste good. So she actually had bacon as the meat in the succotash, and she, drained it all off. So you really could put any kind of meat that you like with it, and it would make it very tasty. So it's just a very hearty dish.
Do you add any other spices other than salt, pepper?
I literally only add pepper. I don't even add salt because I don't think it needs it, but you can add salt, you can add pepper. The onion is already there. If you felt like you didn't have enough, you could add a little onion powder. You could add a little garlic. You could add fresh garlic, wild garlic. I think the wild garlic has a more mild flavor than like a clove of garlic, but you certainly can add it to your flavor base in the way that you like it. I don't tend to. No one in my family really added a lot of extras to it. We just like it the way that it is. And really the flavor comes from that freshness of the corn. I want to just speak to food sovereignty and food justice. I want to speak to the idea around access to traditional foods and the ability for indigenous people to hunt, fish, gather, and grow agriculture, and the importance of our access to the waterways and the intersectionality of these things. So people will say things like, well, of course you can grow a garden in your own yard, but of course with the dispossession of the land and the forced urbanization even of a lot of indigenous people has created less access to land of your own and which to grow. But there's also the importance of the waterways. Our ancestors, before Europeans came here, before this land was conquered, and in many cases, the resources and land were dispossessed from the people, we had winter homes and summer homes. And those summer homes, we would move using the waterways, whether the river systems, to get from here to the ocean or the bay. And we would set up our summer villages. And in those summer villages, we would grow our crops: corn, beans, squash, onions, gourds, melons, to name just a few. And we would fertilize that land using fish and seaweed. And that's what gave us such bountiful crops, because of the nutrients we were providing to that soil. It also made us sustainable, as my story that I told you at the beginning told you, because after we harvested the corn, particularly the varieties that were of corn and beans, the flint corn and the dry beans, as opposed to green beans or string beans, those were kept in caches. They were put in woven bags or baskets or mats, and they were lined into a cache in the ground. And that cache was a storage place for that corn and those beans and other crops that we were going to grow, but particularly those. And when we left the summer village and went to our winter village, we would take enough of the corn with us and the beans to feed ourselves during the winter, along with the foods that we hunted, fished, and gathered. When colonists came here, there's often these quotes about God's divine providence, and the fact that colonists, in Massachusetts Bay or Plymouth Bay, they found this corn that was just left there for them to take. And from their perspective, a gift from God. Well, what they really didn't understand or didn't choose to acknowledge is that those caches were there to sustain our people. When we had a tough winter, you could send runners to the summer village to get a little more corn and beans to sustain you. But when it was a normal year and you had brought enough and had enough, when you returned back to your summer village, you would open those caches, and what would you do? You would plant your next crop of corn and beans and squash and other things that we were growing. Because of course, in the early spring, those things are not harvested. So you had to prepare for the next season. And then you would eat some of those dry beans and corn as the early spring. We're in the early spring now. Things are coming up, but there's still not an abundance of foods to harvest. When we get to the thick of the summer and the early fall, there is so much to harvest. So our ancestors would have those caches ready to plant the corn and the beans for the next season and to feed their families, along with the spring fish, the salmon and the herring and shellfish that they were getting from the salt ponds. They would have this food source to sustain them. And it's when we talk about food sovereignty and food justice, it's the right to grow and harvest, and today people use the word forage or gather the resources of the land. And I think of last winter, excuse me, I said that wrong, last fall when my older sons were gathering mushrooms. And when you think about justice, it's about access to things. And they were harvesting some mushrooms along a roadway, and some people came out of the house and they got really angry with them for harvesting these mushrooms. Now, you would think they would be angry if they were going to harvest the mushrooms, but that wasn't what it was about. It was along the roadway. It was probably perfectly accessible for anyone, but they were mad. So what they did is they smashed all the mushrooms up and just destroyed them and left. And so when they went back by, they just saw all the broken pieces there. And it's about access to the lands and the waterways. It's about the right to be able to shellfish. Today, every year, we have to fight our way back to the right of ways that we've had since time immemorial to have access to salt ponds and to the salt waters. I can remember when I was young and newly married and got my husband really upset with me because we were crabbing in the salt pond in Charlestown. We were minding our own business and we only had a few crabs, but we'd been out there for a while. And this gentleman came across in his motor boat and starts screaming at us. "Stop taking all my crabs. You don't belong here. You're taking our crabs." Well, if anybody knows me, I'm pretty mild-mannered unless you ruffle my feathers. And my feathers were truly ruffled that day. And so I started giving this gentleman a serious history lesson on whose land it was. And he was just a tourist that came once in a while and stayed this $1 million house that he may have bought. But this land was our land since time immemorial. It was our homeland. Our ancestors are here. The blood of our ancestors is here. Our lifeways are here. Everything about us is connected to this land. Our ceremonies, our stories, our history, our language, our lifeways, the foods we eat traditionally, the homes we live in, the medicines we use, everything is connected to this land. And so I look at food sovereignty and food justice in that lens, that we need to create access. If it was up to me, my tribal ID would be all I need for hunting and fishing and gathering. You know, why should Narragansett people in our own homeland have to get a permit to hunt or fish or gather from the state of Rhode Island? Of course, on our reservation, we don't need that, but we should be able to hunt and fish and gather across this land that really is our land. Especially when it's named. And that is really important. We should have access to the bay, and we should have access to the ocean. We should have access to the salt ponds, and we should have access to the resources of this land that have sustained us for millennia. And so that's really important to me. My brother-in-law and Cassius Spears and his wife, Dawn, they lead the Narragansett Food Sovereignty Initiative. And it was such a blessing to see us as a community working together prior to COVID, planting, tending, harvesting Narragansett heirloom Flint corn, heritage corn. It is beautiful. And if you get an opportunity to come to Tomaquag Museum this summer, we're going to be reopening for our drop-by days on Wednesdays, 10 to 5, and Saturdays 10 to 2 in June. So be sure to check out our website for any of the requirements that are necessary to protect us for COVID-19. Those are all opportunities to see the Narragansett Flint corn, and to think about and talk about food sovereignty and food justice. I'm wondering if there's a question. What time is it?
We did have a really great question from Molly Rose, who's one of our staff people. She wanted to know about serving suggestions, what kinds of vessels you use to eat out of. Is it a bowl meal or is it a plate meal? I'm a
So
bowl person. I always put things in bowls,
So-
whether it's in bowls or not. But and also any sides or garnishes that you like to add.
So in my family, succotash can, as I said, can be a side dish. Like right now, I would consider this a side dish because we didn't add meat and other vegetables into it. So if it's corn, beans, the onions, and it's straight succotash, I consider that a side dish. So we might serve that with venison. We might serve that with scallops. We might serve that with turkey. We always have it at Thanksgiving. I personally am a bowl fanatic. So I like everything in bowls because I just don't like certain things to touch. And I like things that, and because it has a little bit of moisture, if you're a person that doesn't like moisture to run into other things, then you would want to have it in a bowl. But my grandmother, when she served at Dovecrest, succotash was served family style almost always with another family style dish of green beans. You know, it had that other vegetable going. And it would be on the plate with everything else. You know, you could have 3 Johnny cakes, you could have the succotash, you could have, the meat, whether that was turkey or duck or venison or fish like salmon or cod or what have you. So it can be served as a side dish or as a main dish. I usually think of it as a main dish if we add another vegetable like squash, and if we add a meat to it, although it doesn't need it. So for the vegetarians out there, that's why you have beans in it. It doesn't need an additional meat. You could just add a little more beans to your mix, and you could mix beans too. So you could have shelled beans, and you could have green beans, and you could have kidney beans, like red kidney beans along with the pink beans. So you could add extra beans to that. I prefer in my succotash 1 bean. That's my preference. But I do like to make it a 1-pot meal. So putting it in the crock pot and adding other meats and vegetables to it is really delicious.
Oh, somebody asked lima beans.
No lima beans. I know out there in the universe they make succotash with lima beans, but I am against lima beans. That's a preference. If you like lima beans, go for it. I absolutely abhor lima beans. And I don't believe succotash belongs with lima beans, but there are other people out there that do like them and do use them in there. And you can use other kinds of beans. You can test it out with other flavors and, you know, make them. Basically, today, if you're in a culinary world, anything that has corn and beans in it, they call it a succotash. And so you can ad lib and put different kinds of onions, like purple onions in it, and you could put different kinds of beans. They have, you know, fancy beans, they're dried beans but look purple, and you could do yellow beans or whatever. I don't like the texture of lima beans, and I don't like the taste of lima beans, so I don't ever use lima beans. But I do know people that use them. It's just not my preference, because I very much, you know, we're creatures of our families, and my grandmother was an amazing chef, and she, you know, owned and operated and founded a restaurant. And so I tend to make my succotash in the way that she did. And she always gave me compliments and said that I should have opened a restaurant because I cooked like her, which I think is like the highest honor you could ever get. I do not cook as good as her. No way in this world. But I do love to cook for my family, for my friends. I don't know as though I could cook at the level that she did for in a restaurant. But, you know, we have succotash year round. And it's a great dish to round out a meal, and a great dish to become the meal of its own. Is there another question?
Yeah, we had a question about, I think I kind of want these two to go together, which is the Tomaquag at the new location, or is that still in the works? Which is a great opportunity for you to talk about the new location and what that's going to be like. And then there's another question that, is there plans for another Narragansett restaurant? And I'm wondering if there's a way to like have a restaurant at the new location?
So the answer to that is we will have a small restaurant that we're terming a cafe in the behind the scenes. It probably will have a different name when we actually do it. So we will have some kind of cafe at the museum where there will be indigenous foods that will go with the seasons. And they will be more what I would call brunch, lunch foods, that meaning lighter meals. Rather than like a full dinner place with all the meals. So yes, we will have that. No, we are not at our new location. It'll probably take us a good 2 years, if not a little bit longer to get there. We are knee deep in architectural and engineering planning, which is a big process to go through where they literally tell you where the plugs are going to be and everything in the behind the scenes in a building. If everything can go well, we will break ground in the fall of 2022 and hopefully move in by the fall of 2023. So we have a little ways to go. We've been doing a lot of work. 3 of our 4 buildings, 2 have the museum building and the education center are completely done as far as the architectural and engineering planning, and we are doing an environmental assessment to ensure that we can meet our goal of net zero carbon emissions. So that's going on right now. We're also doing beginning planning for exhibit design, and what kinds of exhibits we are going to have in our museum. If you have thoughts and ideas, feel free to shoot us an email and give us your suggestions, and keep your eyes out as the year goes on for focus groups and surveys and things like that, where you can let us know your thoughts. We are getting ready to do the architectural and engineering planning for the Indigenous Empowerment Network building, which will have the artist in residency studio, the training spaces, and education spaces for interns, apprentices, and other Native community members. And the cafe will be in that building as well. The main museum building will have some offices, a gallery, the exhibits gallery, the gift shop. Food items will be sold in the cafe. So if we have tea that you can buy to take home, or Johnny cake meal, or beans that are heritage beans, those things will sell in the cafe because we don't want any food in the main museum section. And then the phase 2 will come after those 3 buildings are done, and that will be the Archive Research Center. So we have a ways to go. So if you haven't come to Tomaquag Museum, come see us now so you can get the before, and in a couple of years you can get the after, and be part of our team and give us ideas and thoughts and suggestions as we continue to grow.
Someone said, gotta have Johnny cakes.
Oh, most definitely. And if you look at our YouTube page, it's Tomaquag, YouTube/Tomaquag Museum. You can see me doing a demonstration on Johnny cakes on our YouTube page. So you can check that out. And then there's a wonderful children's hour with Silver Moon LaRose, where she is taking you on a walk with her 5 or 6-year-old son, gathering greens and everything from dandelion greens to other kinds of edibles in her yard, and making a salad. So you can check that out as well. We have lots of resources on our website and YouTube page, etc.
Lorén, there was a question. You had mentioned heritage seeds and potentially being able to grab those. And someone had mentioned Baker Creek Heirloom Seeds sells a bean called Succotash and claims it is from the Narragansett. Is that true? And I'm also just curious in general, in terms of like seeds and where they are living right now, and where you find out about new seed varieties or old seed varieties, and like, what does seed exchange look like for you and your community?
Well, so the Food Sovereignty Initiative does a lot with that. We don't really do that directly here. Maybe we will more once we get to our new facility, because we have extensive gardens planned with all indigenous plants. Everything from gardens like Three Sisters corn, bean, and squash, and gourds and melons, but also the things that historically were considered wild plants and edibles that will be in gardens as well, from every variety of berry to plants like bulrush, cattail, to, you know, things that are edible, things that are medicinal, things that are herbs, and things that are useful. So all different kinds of resources. So we have a very extensive plan for that. And so we look forward to people learning from those gardens, but also having opportunities through classes and programs to actually harvest things and make things, whether that's rose hip jellies, or I tend to use it like a glaze on my roasts, which is absolutely phenomenal. You have a nice venison or a beef roast and you glaze it with the rose hip compote, if you will. Is really, really delicious. So those are the kinds of things that we want to be able to do at our new site. We do those things sporadically here, but we'll have more space to do those kinds of programming regularly. Both the Education Center and the Indigenous Empowerment Building will have food opportunities. We'll do demonstrations like this in our Education Center in the future. Is there a question?
Somebody wants to know about the origin of the name of Johnny Cake. Is it a corruption of Native terminology?
Great question. It is a corruption of Native terminology because it's actually known as a journey cake, because you can take it on a journey. It's flint cornmeal, so you use your mortar and your pestle to grind the corn, and you parch it with boiling water. And then, you know, you could put it on a stone that's really hot in your fire and make it a cake. And that journey cake could be put in a pouch and taken with you on a journey. And you would actually match that with pemmican, which is a dried meat with nuts in it, often sunflowers, but it could be walnuts or chestnuts or other kinds of nuts pounded into it, nuts or seeds pounded into it, along with berries pounded into it. So it could be cranberries, which was very popular because they dry really well, but it also could be other kinds of berries like blueberry or grapes that are dried, raisins, AKA, and pounded into it. And because those dry really well, depending on the season, you'd use whatever berry or nut that was available. And that makes an MRE, meals ready to eat, because you have all the things in your food groups ready to go. You've got your proteins, you've got your starches, you've got your vitamins and minerals, everything is there. So journey cake, because you could take it on a journey with you, and it doesn't need refrigeration. Only reason a Johnny cake today needs refrigeration is because people have corrupted the recipe and have added milk to it. If you add milk to it, then you have to refrigerate it. If you don't add the milk to it, which is the original recipe, which is what my kids and family all eat, we have to do that demonstration another day, but you have to really parch the meal. If you do not have boiling water and you do not mix it appropriately, you get dry, gritty Johnny cakes, which are not good. But if you do it correctly, you get a nice soft cake in the middle and then the crisp on the outside, and it's absolutely delicious. That's another thing that you can eat as a side dish, a breakfast meal with, you know, maple syrup and fruits, or as a main meal and put like a thick gravy meat. So if you have venison and gravy, which we all love, on it, you could have that, or you could have like fish in a white sauce, like codfish. You could have any meat in a gravy, turkey and gravy, and put it over, just like you would do it over mashed potatoes. You could do it over Johnny cakes, which is really delicious. And we love Johnny cakes with fruit in them. We make Johnny cakes with cranberries, with strawberries, with blueberries, with huckleberries, you name it. Any kind of fruit is delicious in a Johnny cake. So it's really known as a journey cake, but today people call it a Johnny cake. And at my grandmother's restaurant, you could get the Johnny cakes going around in the middle, like in a circle on your plate as a whole meal. And in the center, she always served it with applesauce with an apple ring. And it was so pretty. You could get it with bacon or you could get it with sausage. If you ate it as, you could eat that meal, which was, some people might call it breakfast food because it has that, but you could have it for lunch or for dinner or for breakfast. Or you could have the 3 Johnny cakes as a side, like it was the starch, potatoes or rice. Or you could have it like a dinner and have the gravy, meat and things like that on it, or as a side with meats. So I'm wondering, this is question time, if there's any other questions out there.
Are there any courses to learn Narragansett or any Niantic languages available to the public at the museum? Or do you plan for example, for the children at the education center?
So right now there's not courses per se, like a class, but there is a lot of Narragansett language and a lot of our programming and on a lot of our children's hour, where in the children's hour, if you go on our YouTube page, you have to kind of click videos because they're kind of, the more you put on, it kind of gets hidden behind. But if you click on videos and look for the ones that say children's hour, Lindsay Montanari, one of our educators, who's also Narragansett, she does a lot with it, but she set them up so that you pause and she would say things like, Weechamin, corn, say Weechamin, Weechaminiash, corn, and so she would do that. So if she's saying to you to say hello, and she'd be like, Asku Kwasen, hello. And there's language throughout all of those children's hours. So if you want to learn language, that's a great way. There's also the book, Roger Williams' Key into the Language of America, which we made a new edition about, I guess, with COVID, you lose track of time, but it was the fall before COVID. And we did a new edition of that book, and we did footnotes, all from a Narragansett perspective, talking about and reflecting on how Roger Williams interpreted the world from his worldview. And so it's been very, very well received. People are really enjoying that. Of course, you can get that in lots of places, but you can get it on our online store at tomaquagmuseum.org /store, I think. But the link is at the top of the page, so you should be able to click over there. I might even say online store, I'm not quite sure. And so that's another place that you can learn a lot about language. And the fun part about that is we updated the English for you to make it very easy to read. You don't have to read old English like in the other editions. Yes. It makes it very easy to read, and it also gives you a lot of context on our history, our culture, but also what we're doing today. So if it's talking about Nakomo, we would tell you that we're still doing a Nakomo, and it's one of our 13 Thanksgivings, and you might come to Tomaquag for one and have some Succotash and some Johnny cakes and some venison. And so there's these opportunities, and hopefully when we get past this point of COVID-19 and it's more safe, we'll be able to start having our in-person events again, hopefully in 2022. Right now, we are going to be doing Strawberry Thanksgiving virtually, so you can check it out virtually. There'll be all kinds of interesting things the last week in June related to Strawberry Thanksgiving. And we will be having our annual honoring and cultural showcase in July this year. For those of you that have been before, know it's usually in the fall, but we've really decided we're so busy in the fall with cultural education that we're going to try to push it back into the summer. And so this year it's going to be on July 29th. And if you check out our website and click honoring, you'll see all kinds of wonderful, amazing people that we're honoring this year in celebration of heading towards our new facility at the University of Rhode Island, and people that are very impactful for the Native community. And so you can check that out there. And our hope is that in 2022, we'll be able to have our honoring event in person and maybe have a farm to table or a salt water to table kind of dinner event in the summer of 2022. So that's our hope. And so we're looking forward to the idea of that. Are there any other questions?
There are not other questions. I just want to mention I put a bunch of links in the chat. So if anybody wants to go check out the video page at the Tomaquag Museum, it's tomaquagmuseum.org/gift shop, FYI. And also there's a link in there to the YouTube channel. It's a little bit further up if you scroll. And I think one of the reasons that I thought about seeds is I just heard about this project. The Providence Community Library is doing a seed library. And they are making a big effort to have traditional seeds and have stories around those seeds. And so I put a link to that project up at the top as well.
And in our collection here at the museum, we actually have a seed collection that was started long before I became the director. And we have those jars and specimens from long ago in our collection. So hopefully when we get to our new research center, people will have access to those kinds of things a little more readily than here. And so we're looking forward to it. But if you're interested in archives and collections, we did just put recently an archival link on our webpage where our archivist has shared some finding aids of various collections that we have. I mean, we have many more things, but this is the beginning of creating some access for researchers and just interested parties. And also another way that we share access to our archives and collections is through our belongings blog, which we try to post something at least once a month. And we have a lot of really great blog posts that include video, audio, pictures from our archives and collections that I think you'd really enjoy if you're interested in that kind of thing. And some of it spotlights my grandparents' restaurant. I believe there's a blog post that we did at Thanksgiving that was from a Dovecrest Thanksgiving from years and years ago that even has a video clip from, I think, the Rhode Island Historical Society, if my memory serves.
Nice. So I'm noticing that people are starting to drop off a little bit. So I want to get to our how to get in touch slides as well. So I'm going to navigate away from your beautiful background and that beautiful spread in front of you is so gorgeous. Everything just looks stunning. Thank you so much for like sharing the baskets and it's just like, it's magic. So really, really grateful for that. And also just wanted to just give gratitude for the abundance that you've brought, the abundance of history, the abundance of learning, food, and also just friendship. And like that willingness to share your knowledge and your history is just so appreciated. Thank you for that. And all right, so here we go. I'm going to share my screen. So here's some information about the Tomaquag Museum. If you want to go to their website, you can donate there, which I highly recommend. There's some statistics here about the rates of poverty and food insecurity for Native people in Rhode Island specifically, and it's alarming. So the work that Lorén and the Tomaquag Museum are doing to sort of draw attention to the incredible wealth and history is really valuable and really deserving of our support in every way that we can provide it. And you can also check out their volunteer page. So there's some opportunities there. There's website updates. They're on social media. I put the YouTube link in there. So definitely continue to follow. You all do such a good job with your social media. I feel like I'm seeing amazing things popping up all of the time. I just love following your accounts. So please do that. I promise you'll be the better for it. And then just a couple Hope's Harvest updates before we head out. For those of you who don't know, we've talked a little bit about what we do. Our season prep is underway. We've got volunteer orientation coming up late May, early June with some new protocols. We've been working with Southside Community Land Trust to distribute plant starts, which we think is a really important step towards food sovereignty when people have the ability to grow their own food. And that's something we're really committed to. We're still finishing up our spring training yoga series to get limbered up for all of the bending and lifting that's coming when we start pulling food out of the field. we're currently hiring for a full year AmeriCorps Vista. So if that's something you're interested in, please get in touch with us. We're really looking for candidates and excited about that. And then Lorén, I forgot to mention, I'm really excited to tell people, we have Stephanie Morningstar, who is an amazing indigenous speaker, leader, herbalist, coming to do an event with URI, Tomaquag Museum, and Hope's Harvest in the fall, when there's going to be a lot more sort of events happening around harvest festivals and things like that. She's going to be with us virtually September, I believe it's September 14th, but we'll send out more information about that. And we're super, super excited to have indigenous leaders from other parts of the world coming to join us. And Stephanie Morningstar is such a superstar. We're super excited to have her. If you want to connect with Hope's Harvest, we're at hopesharvest.org. We also have social media accounts, Facebook and Instagram if you want to follow us. Lots of pretty pictures of farms and vegetables to check out. And Merle does an amazing job with all of our stories and making sure that we're letting you know what we're up to. So I just want to thank everybody who came so much for taking time this evening to be here. I feel like I've learned an incredible amount. I feel like much more connected and deeper relationship to the land that we're on, and just so much respect for that history and the richness of that history, and so much appreciation, Lorén, for all of the work that you do. Really, really, again, just deeply grateful for that. So unless there's any other burning questions, I'm gonna call it and just say goodbye to everybody. Again, thank you so much for being here.